Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 687 for April 1st, 2018. Coming up in a few minutes.
We actually have changed Big Peat to something more dramatic, and it's Big Meat with an M, and it's aimed at the barbecue and the carnivore in the marketplace, most certainly not aimed at the vegetarians who are whiskey drinkers, because the idea is that we've infused Big Peat in bacon.
Fred Lang has never taken himself too seriously, and that's why his master classes at whiskey festivals around the world were always a hit. He's come off the road for the most part now and turned over much of the day-to-day management at Douglas Laing and Co to his daughter Cara and his son-in-law Chris Leggett. But the chairman of the board still has a few things up his sleeve, along with other new whiskeys to celebrate the company's 70th anniversary this year. More with Fred Lang coming up later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the calendar of events, this week's Your Voice, and the What I'm Tasting This Week department, all coming up on this week's WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast, brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot-still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch Whisky, from this place and these people, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by Highland Park. Edrington is giving the Macallan's core ranges a major facelift worldwide. The 1824 series is going away. It was the core range in most markets around the world. Ruby was discontinued last year, with the Sienna and Amber expressions now meeting the same fate. The Macallan Gold will survive with a new name. It'll now be known as the Macallan Double Cask Gold, and it'll become part of the new Double Cask range alongside the 12-year-old Double Cask. The Fine Oak range is being renamed the Triple Cask Matured range to highlight the use of ex-bourbon barrels alongside American and European oak ex-sherry casks. And the existing sherry oak matured single malts will form the core of the sherry oak range. By the way, the new Macallan bottle design that made its debut at the end of 2016 with the 12-year-old double cask will be extended to the rest of the current lineup starting this month. It also eliminates any further confusion with the Macallan's 1824 Collection travel retail range, which was replaced last fall with the no-age statement Quest Collection malts. No one from the Macallan was made available for interviews this week. We're now getting word on the first Glenallachie single malts to be released since Billy Walker and his partners bought the Speyside distillery from Chivas Brothers last year. The distillery is 50 years old this year, and Billy Walker picked 6 casks ranging from 1978 to 1991 to be bottled as limited edition releases ahead of the full range that is set to launch in June. The whiskeys will be available at retailers in the UK, Taiwan, and select other markets for prices ranging from £200 to around £700 each. That's around $280 to $980 each. None of the 6 expressions will be coming to the U.S., though. However, Glenallachie has signed a deal with a U.S. importer to make the distillery's core range available in the U.S. this summer. A few weeks ago, we shocked Westland Distillery's Matt Hoffman by asking him about his newest whiskey. Okay, what's this thing that looks more like a sport drink label than a whiskey?
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's the thing on the TTB website with the blue and green label that has a big S in your Westland logo all over it.
It's I don't think I can talk about that right now. Just maybe wait in a few weeks and maybe we can talk more about it.
So you guys haven't decided to switch to start making sports beverages instead of whiskey?
Part of me wants to joke about that, but I also want it to be very clear. No, we're making single malt whiskey. So no, you'll see.
Now we have the details, and as we probably should have guessed, Sport Dram is a bit of an April Fool's joke. Here's a clip from the Sport Dram website's online video.
Winning is for the strong. That's why you train. Because muscles are for winners, and winners are born thirsty. Sport Dram is for the strong, the brutal, the winners. Clinch the quench!
And yes, the video is about as over-the-top as you might expect. But the whiskey itself is for real. It's a single malt that will go on sale exclusively at the distillery in Seattle on Tuesday. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. On the bourbon front, Buffalo Trace is following through on its Craft Your Perfect Bourbon online experience, where more than 100,000 bourbon lovers got to choose their favorite mash bill, warehouse location, age, and proof. The result will be a new W.L. Weller bourbon to be released this summer called the CYPB edition. As the majority of those taking part in the online survey demanded, it'll be an 8-year-old wheated bourbon matured on the top floors of Buffalo Trace's warehouses and bottled at 47.5% ABV. It'll be an annual limited release that will sell for around $40 a bottle. The American Distilling Institute handed out its annual awards this week at its conference in Portland. Seattle's Copperworks Distilling was named Distiller of the Year. Woodhat Spirits of Missouri won Best in Class for craft distilled spirits for its Bloody Butcher Red Corn Whiskey. Virginia Distillery Company won Best of Class for craft blended spirits for its cider cask-finished Virginia Highland Whiskey. And Detroit's Valentine Distilling won Best of Class for merchant bottled, read that sourced spirits, for its Mayor Pingree Blue Label Single Barrel Straight Bourbon. Finally, Australia's Fleurieu Distillery took Best of Class honors for international whiskies with its G.R. Andrews & Son single malt. Now, Dave Broom's done almost everything a whiskey writer can do, except maybe star in a film. And we should note that Charlie MacLaine beat him to that several years ago with his supporting role in The Angel's Share. That's about to change, though. Dave and a team of filmmakers led by director Adam Park are about to start shooting The Amber Light. They've raised $47,000 so far through a Kickstarter campaign and are pushing to raise the final $8,000 before the campaign ends this week. Dave told me the movie is more about what Scotch whisky means to Scotland than how it's made.
It's been one of the kind of obsessions of mine over the past few years, really, is that trying to promote whiskey not just as a product and a commodity, but as a cultural product, a manifestation of Scottish culture. And there's been great films made about whiskey, which always end up talking about how whiskey is made and the business history, etc., etc. But there really hasn't been a film which looks at how whiskey has influenced Scottish culture, so whether that's music or poetry or art or whatever. And really looking at, why whiskey is made in Scotland to begin with, how it's been drunk, kind of a social history, and then looking at its impact on Scottish culture. So that's what we're trying to do.
How much are you guys trying to raise with the Kickstarter campaign?
The Kickstarter campaign is up to £39,000, but more would help. We've got about a week left to go, so it finishes on the 7th of April. We're almost there, so we're trying to just ease it over the line at the moment. So it's been fantastic. The response has been great, and I think what's most heartening about it is that the response has been great from all around the world. So we've got investors from Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, the States, UK, etc. So it appears to have struck a chord with a lot of people, a lot of whiskey lovers. So yeah, just that last little bit of support would be gratefully appreciated.
What happens once you reach the goal and you start production, I would assume, at that point, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. You know, this money will allow us to make the film, and then we will be seeking extra finance and funding out with that, just to make it better and better. But this will allow us to do the shoot. So the shoot's going to be in kind of 3 distinct parts. A little bit end of May, beginning of June, which is going to be mainly Glasgow, maybe a little bit on Islay, and then mainland in July, and then back to Islay and Edinburgh and Glasgow for the final bit of shooting in August. And got some great people lined up to participate in it. We've got Ian Rankin, famous crime writer, big whiskey lover, some really good musicians also lined up who will be performing live. So it's not just in the soundtrack, but actually performing live. Alistair Roberts is doing some, James Yorkson is doing some, and some more lined up, which I can't quite announce yet. Alistair Gray, who's a really, really famous Scottish author and artist, he's coming on board as well. So yeah, it's just the response from the non-whiskey world, if you want, from the arts side of it, has just been amazingly positive and really very, very rewarding. Because it's almost as if these guys have been sitting there thinking, well, we are great whiskey lovers and great whiskey drinkers, but we've not actually found a way of being able to articulate why we love it. So this is really opening up a fascinating discussion.
You're going to give everybody a misleading impression if you don't go to Islay in the wintertime.
Yes. Well, yeah. But one reason we wanted to go to Islay is that the story kind of starts with me asking some questions about whiskey in Glasgow, and then we go to Islay, really to try and root whiskey in the Scottish landscape and Scottish terroir. So to talk about geology and talk about barley and talk about peat, and really just try to unpeel the fact that the reason why whiskey tastes of whiskey is because of the geological structure of Scotland, because of its climate, because of peat, etc., etc. So Islay during the summer when the barley is growing, it actually makes a lot of sense. I think most people kind of understand that Scotland is a fairly damp climate.
No.
I might dress up in a fleece every so often. Right enough, we'll be filming during summer, so it probably will be snowing somewhere.
Let's turn to your other love for a second, Japanese whiskeys. You're going on a book tour for The Way of Whiskey along the U.S. East Coast in April. Let's give people a chance to figure out where you're going to be.
Yeah. So I'm doing a couple of gigs in New York, one at the Japan Society, which I'm really excited about. That's right next to the UN building. So that's a fairly kind of high-end venue. I'm not used to playing venues like that. So that's going to be kind of a lecture and then a Q&A with Noah Rothbaum and members of the audience, doing another gig in New York, and then coming down to Philly to come see the guys in Philly doing an event, again, kind of tasting in Philly, and then off to Jack Rose in DC to do another kind of tasting and talk there as well. So yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's going to be good fun. I just did one a couple of days back, actually, in my adopted home city of Brighton. And yeah, the appetite for Japanese whiskey and kind of knowledge of Japanese whiskey and just seems to be growing and growing. So yeah, I'm delighted to be able to kind of share some of my thoughts about why Japanese whiskey is Japanese with folk.
You can find a link to the Kickstarter campaign for the Amber Light in our show notes at WhiskyCast.com, and links for all of Dave's book tour stops on the U.S. East Coast in our calendar of events. Of course, you can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at WhiskyCast.com. The news is brought to you by Highland Park, the Orkney single malt with Viking soul. Winter brought us the dark, and now springtime is bringing the light back The light is Highland Park's newest single malt. It's on the way, just like summertime. Get all of the details at highlandparkwhiskey.com.
This is whiskey. Johnny Walker's Scotch Whisky. From this place, and these places in that place. These are the people that make it. Aging in oak for 12 long years. See, the land that shapes these people and the people that shape this whisky all shape how bloody good it tastes. Bold as it is complex. For every step you take, this is Johnny Walker Black Label, friends. Step right up.
Can I drink this now?
Johnny Walker Black Label Blended Scotch Whisky. 40% alcohol by volume. Imported by Diageo North America, Norwalk, Connecticut. Please drink responsibly.
The latest episode of WhiskyCast Virtual Tastings is online now. Last weekend in Cornwall, Ontario, during the Wonderful World of Whiskey show, I put Davin de Kergamo, Mark Bylock, and Frank McDonald to the test, tasting 3 single malts blind. They didn't get to find out what they were tasting until after the scores were tabulated. And here's some of the fun when they found out. Whiskey number 2 came in second with an average score of 4.3. Anybody have any guesses?
It doesn't really taste like Scotch. There's that note that you noted, Mark, that I don't get what it is. It's a fruity thing. I don't know. Not a clue. I'm sorry, Mark. I don't have a...
No, it was my least favorite, so I'm not...
You guys are going to scream.
Oh, boy. It's...
No.
Really?
Yep.
The quintessential Isla, and I don't recognize it as Scotch? Davin, it's time to hand in your walking papers.
Now, we bleeped out the names of the whiskeys to keep them a surprise. If you'd like to know just what stumped the panelists, you can download the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel wherever you get your podcasts or at whiskycast.com. And by the way, Davin and I were also Mark Bylock's guests on the Whiskey Topic podcast. We were filling in for Jamie Johnson, who was in Scotland last weekend. There's a link to the Whiskey Topic's website in our show notes at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the inbox now for this week's Your Voice, brought to you by Lot 40. Ryan Hampton of Chicago listened to our discussion on the Whiskey Topic and posted this note on Instagram. Listening to WhiskyCast and Davin Decay just shooting the breeze about whiskey and out-of-the-way distilleries they have tried was a delight. You were good too, Mark Bylock. Thanks, Ryan, but Bylock did a great job playing traffic cop as well and keeping us both in line. Had a question on our Facebook page from Shyamal Ramachandran in San Diego late this week. Mark, if I recall correctly, there was a brief discussion and mention about whiskey stores in Tokyo on one of the fairly recent WhiskyCast episodes. I can't seem to find it now. Could you please point me to it? I'm looking for recommendations in Tokyo and Kyoto. We'll be visiting in a couple of weeks. Thanks. Well, that was in episode 670 from last December. But since I just happened to have Dave Broom on the phone, and his latest book, The Way of Whiskey, is all about Japanese whiskey and its culture, why not ask him for some recommendations?
There's a couple of places. In terms of department stores, Isetan, now they've got really excellent whiskey selection, also kind of whiskey bar where you can do tastings. And as far as probably the most visible and most widely accessible site or chain rather is a chain called Shinanoya, and Shinanoya just have an absolutely fantastic selection of whiskey. They do a lot of their own independent single cask bottlings, but if you're going over to Japan to try and find rare Japanese whiskies, you will struggle to find rare Japanese whiskies. The selection will be wider than it is in the US, undoubtedly, but the stock shortage is real. So even the domestic market has got a reduced selection these days of whiskies. But you will be able to pick up some brands and some expressions which you won't see in the export market. So I would certainly recommend trying to grab some of the whiskies from Gotemba distillery, which aren't available in the export markets as yet. you can quite probably get perhaps some more unusual Chichibu or some of the more limited edition whiskies from Suntory. But yeah, don't expect the shelves to be stuffed with Kuruzama.
Shyamel, I hope that answers the question, and let us know what you bring back from your trip. Now, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that I'd be posting a head-to-head comparison of all 6 bottlings of the new Middleton d'Arguelac Bluebell Forest Edition at WhiskyCast.com. The story went up this week, and I picked trees number 2 and 4 as my favorites of the 6. That's Dram Good, at Omar Fitz, tweeted from Ireland. Tree 4 of Bluebell was my favorite. All were amazing whiskies. Have a drop left in each sample. May just dip into them for the hashtag Friday Night Dram. And speaking of Irish whiskey, there's a bit of a controversy online over a new Irish whiskey from the Sadler's unit of Halewood International. Peaky Blinder gets its name not from the current TV series about a British criminal gang, that's Peaky Blinders. But the Peaky Blinders gang was real and based in Birmingham, England, before World War I. Here's the thing. The Peaky Blinder whiskey is an Irish whiskey, but on the label it's listed as, quote, a product of the British Isles. If you know anything at all about Ireland's history over the last 100 years or so, you could have guessed that this was not going to be well received in Ireland. If you have small children anywhere within earshot, this would be the time to pause until they're safely out of hearing range. Potstill Will, at Potstill Whisky on Twitter, is consistently one of Ireland's most outspoken whiskey figures. And here's what he tweeted about this the other night, and I'm quoting now, language and all. I'm livid, to put it mildly. Halewood, the shower of degenerate fuckers, have decided to trod on our history. Irish whiskey is product of Ireland, not the Republic, not Northern, and not UK. If they tried this in Scotland, they'd be fucked. Distillers in this country need to stand. This is not a geopolitical outcry. This is the hard work of distilleries north and south to establish our whiskey with a geographical identity like Scottish whiskey. It's our heritage, our economy. With the turmoil of Brexit on our shores, we don't need this. Now, I've reached out to executives at Sadler's and Halewood International for their side of the story, but have not yet received a response from either one. If I do, I'll be sure to share it with you. And if you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always post it on the Your Voice page at WhiskyCast.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast, and my email address is comments@whiskycast.com. This week's Your Voice is brought to you by Lot 40, Canada's award-winning 100% pot still rye whiskey. Lot 40, unapologetically Canadian. Please drink responsibly. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events. Chambers Bay Distillery will have its Spring Whiskey Night this coming Thursday in Bellevue, Washington. Whiskey Weekend 20 is this coming weekend in Almelo, the Netherlands, along with the Nth Ultimate Whiskey Experience in Las Vegas, and a benefit whiskey tasting for Deirdre's House in Morristown, New Jersey. Deirdre's House works with victims of child abuse and neglect, and if you can make it, they'd appreciate the support. The Whiskey Obsession Festival is April 11th through the 14th at Michael's on East in Sarasota, Florida, which happens to be where I first discovered my taste for whiskey many years ago. Whiskey Live Cape Town is that same weekend in South Africa, and MB Roland Distillery kicks off the spring with its first Vintage Crafts and Cocktails Fair of the year in Pembroke, Kentucky. The Spirit of Speyside Festival is bringing the judging for its annual Whiskey Awards to the Brandy Library in New York City on April 16th, with 2 judging sessions open to anyone who wants to sign up. Whiskey Fest is in Washington, D.C. on April 17th, And Sagamore Spirit Distillery will celebrate its first anniversary with a party on April 21st and 22nd, just up I-95 in Baltimore, Maryland. Whiskey on Ice is April 21st in Bloomington, Minnesota. The Whiskey X Chicago is on April 27th. The Bristol Whiskey Festival is April 28th in Bristol, England. And Cavalan's Ian Chang will lead a masterclass on May 1st at the Hard to Find Whiskey Shop in Birmingham, England. Right now, we have 167 different events around the world on our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com. If you have a tasting or a festival coming up and you'd like to let whiskey lovers know about it, just use the contact form on our website and let us know about it.
Redbreast fans have always cherished our whiskey's sherry notes, so we set out to embellish that character. Introducing the Redbreast Listowel edition, a quintessential single pot still Irish whiskey finished in first fill Oloroso sherry casks from Spain's prestigious Bodegas Listowel. Carrying Redbreast's trademark pot still spices and dark dried fruit notes, the Listowel edition is graced with an enduring sherry finish that would be better described as a final act. Discover the newest branch on the Redbreast family tree.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Lagavulin. 70 years ago, Fred Douglas Laing founded Douglas Laing and Co in Glasgow, Scotland, as a whiskey blender and bottler. He eventually turned the business over to his sons, Fred and Stuart, who ran the company as a team until they agreed to go their separate ways 5 years ago next month. Stuart and his sons took their share of the assets and founded Hunter Laing and Co, and in the last couple of years, they've been busy building the new Ardnahoe distillery that will open later this year on Islay. Fred and his daughter Cara kept the Douglas Laing name and many of the company's brands. Cara and her husband Chris Leggett now manage most of the day-to-day operations of Douglas Laing and Co, while Fred has taken the role of chairman of the board. The thing is, it's not a good idea to leave Fred Laing with a lot of free time on his hands, because if you know Fred, well, he can be the mischievous type. For instance, take the newest edition of Big Peat, Douglas Laing's Islay blended malt. Let's talk about this bacon-infused Big Peat.
Well, I think you've maybe spoiled the joke there, Mark, because certainly what's been happening with Big Peat allows us to play certain games beyond the commercial realities of the brand. We've had probably the best part of 18 to 20 special bottlings that have spun out of Big Peat. Big Peat visits Japan, Big Peat visits Paris, Big Peat visits Russia and the Mediterranean, and he gets dressed accordingly. The idea was quite specifically that we were going to take a different approach on the run-up to April, where we actually have changed Big Peat to something more dramatic, and it's Big Meat with an M, and it's aimed at the barbecue and the carnivore in the marketplace, most certainly not aimed at the vegetarians who are whiskey drinkers, because the idea is that we've infused Big Peat in bacon, and it's a streaky back bacon which has at one stage been soaked in brine. It's been dried over whiskey barrels, and it's been rubbed with salt so that the bacon itself almost imparts the heart and soul of Big Peat himself. So in actual fact, you will probably see, or will shortly see, the packaging that we've put together for it. And historically, Big Peat has had a lot of fun. The best one for me was when we had Big Patricia, and Big Peat suddenly appeared, still with his beard, but with pigtails, looking very attractive. and so from your point of view, as long as you release this after April the 1st, there will be other people, we hope, who will have actually placed some orders, because the packaging looks attractive enough to eat. And of course, the mixologists are actually using a little bit of bacon in some of their cocktail infusions, so it's not so far off the wall. And I hope it's taken in the good spirit that that we sent it out in.
So is this a real edition, or is this just a joke?
No, it's an April one through and through. We thought we might send out chocolate Easter eggs, so we had a bacon and egg Big Peat. But no, Big Peat has actually turned into Big Meat for April 1 this year, but we will not be releasing it. I think the Scotch Whisky Association would have us by the scruff of our necks if we played in that particular way with this brand. But it's one of these brands that also have a lot of fun with it. It's a pretty serious peated, phenolic, smoky, ashy, coal dusty sort of vatted malt in the bottle. And so things like our face bottling, which we did last year with the photographs of probably about 180 or 200 Big Peat fans pixelated onto the tube. We're doing something a little bit different once again this year. I think it's quite unique in the Scotch whisky industry. I cannot give that away. Same quality of spirit in the bottle. We won't play with that. But in terms of the packaging, there's a lot of fun being put into that. And a lot of thought goes into it. Although it's fun, there's a lot of thought that our team put into it. So that's maybe one to watch out for as we progress. Certainly the face bottling for later this summer.
You guys seem to have a lot of fun with this, and I think it's probably because as a family-owned company, you don't have to worry about the shareholders and the stock market analysts and Wall Street and the FTSE 100 and all that. You guys are able to sort of have fun and release things the way you'd like to release them without having to answer to anybody.
Yeah, it's certainly what we term as the fun side of the serious aspect of the Scotch whisky business. But remember, you're talking to one of the shareholders, so the shareholders are obviously interested also in making a profit. So if we can combine both, Cara and I do it. But we, as you say, we don't have Wall Street or even an AIM overview of the scenario. Yeah, and actually I think and hope that the heart and soul and the fun shows through. If you look at our website, we still take quite a self-deprecating view of the company. We poke a little bit of fun at ourselves. That maybe allows us at different stages to poke fun at other people, because if you can't take it yourself, you shouldn't dish it out. But yeah, and let me say, within the serious side of the business, we had a wonderful financial year last year. That new Generation 3 that we added to the company are bringing a real expertise and imparting a lot of knowledge, enthusiasm and expertise that's paying dividends for us. You know, with the Suntory, Morrison Bowmore background and White Mackay background that Cara and Chris have brought, it's leaving me wondering what I've got to do. I've got to plod through and follow what the kids are doing out there. So it's really thrilling just now to see how things are progressing, and we've got a lot more plans as perhaps you're aware, it being our 70th anniversary. So a lot of new things happening in terms of that as well.
And that year was also a pretty important year because, as I recall, you got a fourth generation.
Nice of you to say. Yes, we have Rory Frederick Leggett, and we've got Georgiana. Georgiana, commonly referred to as Georgie, is the wee tomboy. She's 2.5 years old, going on about 13 years, I think. Wee Rory is only 6.5 months, and he's maybe experienced a little bit of the Scotch whisky on his gums when he's been teething. But yeah, it will be interesting to see if in 40 years' time there is the start of a dynasty. It would be nice for me, looking down from where the angels' share eventualizes, and we'll see if it pans out that way. But certainly, it's nice for me to be able to hand over the reins a little bit more and step back, not necessarily step down from my new role, because I've taken on a new role as as chairman of the company. That was the only title we could find for me. And Chris, my son-in-law, Cara's husband, is now managing director, as you maybe picked up.
And Chief Mischief Maker was not an option for the title.
Corporate entertainer was one of the possibilities, and certainly at some of our more serious meetings, I do try to bring a smile to the table. But no, there are some titles that will work and other titles that won't, Mark.
Before we started recording, we were talking about the origins for the remarkable regional malts range. And yes. I want you to tell me that story again, because it really sort of involves how you're able to work the family history into this.
Yeah, I've got to say, a couple of what we modestly entitle the remarkable regional malts spun out of the heart and the fun and the soul of the company. Back in 2009, I was working with a design agency of young Scottish guys who were talking about indeed, it must have been our 60th anniversary releases, one of which was a Port Ellen, and I was asked to describe it. And in amongst the tarry ropes and creosote beach huts and harbour walls, I said it just had a real Big Peat finish to it. And I said, draw me a big guy, a big Elich from Islay in his polo neck sweater. The wind is blowing his beard all over the place, and the creative guy, always with his sunglasses on the top of his head, largely drew us Big Peat on the spot, except for the fact, you've got him smiling, I said, he's about to meet his wife, for which reason he's just taken a big slug of a big phenolic peaty Islay malt, and his face has turned inside out at the prospect of not only the whiskey he's just consumed, but the prospect of meeting his wife. So he rubbed out the smile, and we've got the gruesome features of handsome Big Peat as we see it today. And something similar happened when we were working on the design of our Old Particular, a new single cask range that we were putting into the market in 2013. The same creative was at my home when we were discussing even the brand name as to what we were going to call the single cask release. My wee dog, my wee fox terrier, that was number 8 of a line of 9 fox terriers, came up to look at the visitors, and as the creative guy is thinking and talking, he's also sketching on his sketchbook just the head and shoulders of wee Binks, the fox terrier. And as soon as I looked over his shoulder, I said to Cara, that's got all the makings for a brand. And we said, such a sweet wee rascal. However, we found that rascal was already registered in Class 33 of Scotch Whisky and Protected. So Scallywag, sweet wee Scallywag, was how we first decided to release the brand, for which reason it had to be a sweet wee Speyside that we reacted to. So that's kind of indicative of how, on the hoof, we can put a brand together. And that's with the heart and the soul and a smile on your face doing it. I've got to say thereafter, Cara brought maybe a certain amount more focus. She's a bit of a Robert Burns fan, our national poet, and she always had the brand name Timorous Beastie in mind. And so on a slightly more commercial basis, we put Timorous Beastie together to be an all Highland vatting, 100% Highland malts. We looked at it again and said, well, the islands are not represented, so let's have a look at a brand like something like Rock Oyster, and we put the Rock Oyster brand together. In the same way we put the blends together, put the array of the malts from the Island distilleries that we had out, and we mixed them at different percentages. Had a lot of fun doing so. A couple of late nights where I had to get the taxi home for sure, but we wanted a little bit of sweetness to soften the smoke and the phenols that would come through from something like Skye and Islay. And we think we've got an interesting fusion where there's a nice mellifluous wave of the sweet Arran, Orkney and Jura merging together with the smoke and the phenols from Islay in particular. After that, we looked at our stocks and wondered if we could do something with Campbelltown. So we just released the Galdrons. And so essentially, over the course of less than about 8 years, we have released 6 regional malts, all 100% malt, vatted from the region itself. And these we see as our future. These are very important for us, and they give us a lot of different arms and legs to go in different tangents with and release age statements. In fact, it won't be so far away before we release a 24-year-old Timorous Beastie from the Highlands into the USA. Your 75 centilitre requirement gives us that modicum of a problem because these brands started off in 70 centilitre bottles, but slowly but surely not only are we selling the regional malts into the USA in 75 centilitres, but now starting to release some of the age statement versions of them as well.
Well, that's a problem for us too because we can't get these whiskies.
It is a shame, yeah. I don't know who we speak to in the White House or wherever with the Scottish contacts, but maybe it's something we should be looking at. But I think we've got a TT president in the USA, so he's not maybe going to help us as much as I would want with the Scottish connection.
With these malts, you and Compass Box are the two independents that really have sort of revived the whole blended malt category, because not a lot of folks were releasing blended malts or vatted malts as they used to be known back in the day. But you and Compass Box seem to be the forefront of that blended malt wave that we're starting to see, and it really provides a nice contrast to both single malts and blends.
Yeah, and in different parts of the world, you're actually starting to see some of the big players either reintroduce. I think Johnny Walker has gone back to a green label, which is a vatted malt, and I think Chivas Brothers are doing something similar. So I think John Glazer and ourselves, we've maybe touched a stone that is working well for us. Certainly, I've been thrilled since 2009 when we started with Big Peat as a regional malt, and indeed, I think, and somebody may take issue with me, but I think we were the first to release a vatted malt where we actually showed most of the distilled malts on the actual packaging. We actually showed it on the front label. That on Big Peat we carry malts distilled at Ardbeg, Bowmore, Keilila, and even Port Ellen. Yeah, there's another couple in there, which by dint of contracts we're not allowed to show. And we've done something similar on most of the other regions as well, in terms of the Speyside region with Scallywag. We show that we've got Macallan, Marchlach, Glenrothes, Altmore in them, and we show similarly so with Dalmore and Blair Athol and Glengoyne and Glengeary on the Timorous Beastie. So we like to give a bit of the blending secret away. And it's fair to say that having worked my apprenticeship back in the late 1960s at White and Mackay Distillers, where the eponymous Major Hartley White was one of my bosses, and when I went on to White Horse Distillers, where a lovely gentleman called Gardner Ferrier was the blender, these guys allowed me to sit in on their tastings. I learned a lot at their feet. And then, of course, my dad, Fred Douglas Laing himself, was pretty good in that area. So I've had 3 pretty good mentors over the last 45, 50 years. And I don't claim to be an expert myself, but certainly enjoy putting a blend together that I like, in the hope that similarly so the consumers like it. And touch wood, it seems to be working quite well for us.
Now, I have to ask, because I get this question a lot, how much Port Ellen is actually in Big Peat?
You know the expression in terms of when within the Scotch whisky trade we buy what might be perceived as 100% of a distillate of a specific malt, but the trade name is changed because, quote, it's teaspooned, and there's a very small amount. Well, teaspooned might just come close to to how I would describe what Port Ellen goes into Big Peat. The nice thing is we've got quite good stock. It lasts us a good few years. Some of the Islay malts tend to go softer at 30 years and over, and there are casks that we recognise as quite expressly having taken a turn onto the mainland style. That being so, these casks are reserved for inclusion within Big Peat, where we still have the smack of soft chewed leather and the brininess and the rock pools and the harbour walls on Port Ellen casks. These are the ones that are maintained for our single cask bottlings. So it's not literally a teaspoon, but it's what we put of Big Peat into each vatting is numbered in litres, but against the bigger constituents, the impact is less than I might want. But I can look you in the eye and your listeners in the eye figuratively and say there's a fair amount of Port Ellen in there, which otherwise would have gone into a single cask bottling.
I am kidding,
but
of course.
You're naughty asking me these questions, Mark, because these are very much trade secrets.
Well, I'm kidding, but I'm glad it's more than a teaspoon, or at least you're using teaspoon, because I was looking at an eyedropper on my desk and was thinking more it was eyedropper level.
Oh, no. Look, we would not do that. I know you're dealing with a canny Scotsman, but no, we've got to play fair. We've got to be able to look our consumers in the eye. And in actual fact, no names, no pack drill, but one of the first bottlings that we released of Big Peat, somebody who quite often wears a hat and long hair quite expressly detected the distinctive flavours of Port Ellen within the vatting. So who would I be to suggest that anybody but a great connoisseur of Scotch whisky was wrong? But as I say, no names, no pack drill in that one.
How are the plans for your own distillery coming along? I know you and Cara have been working on it, and we talked with Cara briefly about it when the planning approval for it was received last year. How is that coming?
That was less planning approval last year. What that actually was last year was the acknowledgement from the Scottish Government that we had received a grant.
You're right,
based on food and drink. And so we would not otherwise have stuck our heads up over the parapet at that time. We knew it was going to run in terms of design and construction well into this year, and that is proving to be the case. We're probably a couple of months later than I would want to be, but the site is literally a brownfield site just now at the end of what they call the Canting Basin, which is one of the wet docks off the River Clyde. And we're progressing well enough that I think probably through the course of the summer, the first trenches will be cut. We wanted quite expressly to have the first stage of the construction in place through the course of this year. It's our 70th anniversary, so it's a big year. There's loads of other events and bottlings taking place. I think the real construction will take place through 2019. We'll see the real shape of it through 2019, where we're going to be moving our head office, putting in our own state-of-the-art white glove bottling plant, and have the distillery alongside it. So it will all be under one roof. We've even got what will be a very whiskey-oriented bistro and visitor centre. So it's all coming together. The old guy like me is just a little annoyed that it doesn't happen faster, but this is a long-term venture which will pay dividends in 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And who knows, it could be the advent of different routes that we take towards different extensions of our brands and our strengths, and the whole gamut of what we can do as we go forward is very exciting and full of promise for us. So this is kind of a stage one when we open up the distillery and the head office at Pacific Quay, which will not be the name of the distillery, by the way, Mark. We're keeping the name of the distillery under wraps until a little bit further down the launch period, but it's progressing well, and we're happy to see it.
We really can't talk about the history of 70 years with Douglas Laing without mentioning the events of 5 years ago, when you and your brother Stuart split the company up, and he and his sons went off to found Hunter Laing and Company. This is, I think, something, looking at it from the outside, that worked out well for both sides of the family, because what they're doing now with Ardnahoe Distillery down on Isla and their own products, and what you're doing with Cara and your side of the family, I think it really worked out well for both sides. Although I think at the time we were all a bit sad to see it happen, I think it actually worked out for the best for everybody.
Yeah, well, I'm particularly pleased that we negotiated the Douglas Laing intangible benefit, I suppose it is. I really wanted the Douglas Laing because Fred was my dad. I was named after him. So from that point of view, I took almost an emotional step in that area to hold on to the company name, to give away in the negotiation the tangible asset that was the single cask brand that I had developed from the back of an envelope, the old malt cask brand. And so the deal was perceived maybe on each side as not exactly what I would want for either party, but that's the spirit of a compromise where neither party is 100% happy. But I can only talk now of a company with 70 years standing behind us, not a company with 5 years history. That will come for my brother as they progress. We're celebrating 70 years with a nice range of special XOP platinum bottlings. The platinum is the correct precious metal for a 70th anniversary. I think the packaging that we've put together for that first release of 4 bottlings that we'll do this year. The first one is an Ardbeg 25-year-old, just 251 bottles released from it, with 3 more shaping up through the course of the year, and ending the year with my own absolute favourite, because largely of the emotional association I had, it was my dad's favourite malt, which is one of the reasons we're as well stocked of it as we are, which maybe gives away a little bit of what that last bottling will be. But it's also quite time consuming, because Cara and I have got to individually sign each label, and of course not only is there a label for the bottle, but there's a label for the tube. So these are time consuming but worthwhile events to celebrate that 70th anniversary, which beyond which we'll spin it out into different areas. The whole 70th anniversary allows us to play in different ways with different brands within the equation. And I don't know if you want to go off at a tangent, or if I'm going off at a tangent for you too much, if you want to steer the conversation again, but I'm looking at a short list that Cara suggested that I make reference to, but you're conducting this interview, Mark.
No, go ahead. Go off on a tangent here. We got time.
Yeah.
What are you thinking
about
here?
No, if we've got time.
Yeah, of course.
Well, we've been a little bit interesting in what we call a combination pack, and we've put the combination pack in inverted commas because we've got 282 35-year-old packs coming out, which includes a 35-year-old Kalila and a 35-year-old Canvas. So it's a combination in inverted commas that totals 70 years. And we're beginning to see just a little more interest in the old grain whiskies going into the USA. It's been percolating here, the interest in grain whiskies, over probably the last 6 or 7 years. We've had to work quite hard at them through the tasting nights and the tasting sessions, but we can offer, because we come from that blending background, particularly when the Far East markets had their financial woes of the late 1990s, we've got this overhang of some great stocks of grain whiskies. The market is beginning to appreciate them. Whilst we can release them at 12 and 13 years of age, we're just about, I know, to release a 55-year-old North British, which is actually very reminiscent for me, and I quite often use it in the tasting notes. It's got an American feel. These high-strength grains pull out so much quality from the bourbon cask over a 50-year period that it's really like an old, aged, vanilla-filled, gently spiced and honeyed maple syrupy candy floss, which I can't remember what you guys call candy floss, but very sugary, sweet.
Cotton candy.
Some fascinating taste. That's it. Yeah. So that's one of our other special releases. We've concentrated and worked on the Epicurean blend. Now, I didn't mention that earlier. That's the lowland vatted malt, the Epicurean, and we've worked with a number of mixologists and barmen here in Glasgow at a special tasting that we convened to put together an all lowland vatting, but quite specifically with a Glasgow theme. So higher strength, a little bit chunkier and probably grittier in style on the palate, and we've transferred the pack into a little bit more of a Glasgow theme. So that's tied in with our 70th anniversary. There will be different events scheduled through the year. One of them will actually be rather artistic, which is still under wraps just now, and will obviously be bringing across quite a lot of different customers, quite probably for meetings with our different importers at different stages. So beyond just the 70th anniversary, for humans, we've got a 70th anniversary for our dog and Scallywag. Again, we're being poetic and marketing led because we're releasing a 10-year-old Scallywag in human years, but of course we make a reference to that in canine years. This would be a 70-year-old. So we are waxing, not just in marketing speak, we're waxing quite poetic in how we're managing some of the fun attributes. All Scotch Whisky Association approved, and we're looking forward to a lot of fun.
I was just about to think that the Scotch Whisky Association was going to have some issues with that one.
Yeah. Oh no. We make it very clear. We've got a lot of good associations over at the SWA, and we have long adhered to what they say. We hold them in great esteem, and we work well with them.
So how are you going to top this in 5 years for the 75th anniversary?
I don't know if that may have to be another generation who work on it. I get a chance to do some of the day-to-day blending and help with the design side because I'm a thwarty designer myself. So I only have certain strengths within this company, and they're using me sparingly, and so I'm meant to be taking more time off on ski holidays and tennis holidays and playing squash, and I find it very hard not to come into the office every day, Mark, I've got to say. But so in 5 years' time, I may have managed to pull myself away from the coalface, and I hope, nevertheless, that I can still do a little bit of work for the team. Anyway, I think 80 will be the next big centenary. We've got to just keep on concentrating on growth on a day-to-day, year-by-year basis. So 75 may not be so important for me.
Well, they're using you like a fine Port Ellen in a blend in sparing amounts. Think of it that way.
Yes. Yes, they are. Yeah, that's a nice way to look at it for me. Yeah, for sure.
And thanks to Fred Lang for spending some time with us this week on WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Lagavulin, the legendary Islay single malt. You'll find the classic 16-year-old Lagavulin at a whiskey shop near you, along with the Distiller's Edition and the new Lagavulin 8-year-old. It's a throwback to the distillery's past. Find out more at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, and since it's April Fool's, let's start off with Westland Distillery's annual April Fool's release. As I mentioned earlier, Sport Dram is a distillery-only bottling that's at 54% ABV. The nose is light and clean with a touch of oak tannins, barley sugar, honey, muted spices, and a hint of brown sugar. The taste has a slight tartness at first, followed by a good spicy buildup of clove and cinnamon that's nicely balanced by honey, vanilla, and a nice bit of malty barley sugar underneath. The finish fades away gently with lingering spices, while touches of honey and brown sugar provide a nice balance. The label on this one may be an April Fool's joke, but there is no joke about the whiskey inside the bottle. I'm scoring Westland's Sport Dram a 92. I had the chance to taste 3 different Scandinavian single malts this week, and that in itself is a rare opportunity. I mentioned Box Distillery's new Kärkes 2 Alba Swedish single malt on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and received a sample in the mail the other day. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon casks, then finished for about 2.5 years in virgin American oak, and bottled at 50.8% ABV. The nose is soft and creamy with notes of oak, caramel candy, milk chocolate, honey, and vanilla. The taste has a good maltiness with caramel, honey, butterscotch, and subtle spices that create a nice balance. And the finish has lingering spices with good honey sweetness. I'm scoring Box's Kärkes 2 Alba a 90. And I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Heaven Hill Distillery, who is proud to announce the release of a new series of Old Fitzgerald bottled in bond bourbons. Bottled in an ornate decanter inspired by a 1950s original, it carries on the legacy of John E. Fitzgerald and his act of larceny. Learn more at heavenhilldistillery.com/blog. Think wisely, drink wisely. Roar Larson has been a WhiskyCast listener for years now, and a few years ago he opened the Macallan distillery with some friends on Macallan Island, 32 kilometers off the Norwegian coast and well above the Arctic Circle. They're out now with their first bottling of Macallan Arctic Single Malt, and Roar kindly sent me a sample of it. It's a 3-year-old whiskey matured in ex-bourbon barrels and bottled at 47% ABV. The nose is aromatic and fruity with fresh peaches, green apples, dried flowers, freshly cut grass, a hint of linseed oil, and in my mind is just a little fainty, but not in a bad way. The taste is tart and lemony with a good balance of lemon pepper, allspice, vanilla, and dried flowers, and the finish is medium length and slightly tart with just a touch of oak. I can't wait to see how Macallan's whiskey matures as it gets older. Roar also sent along a sample of 15-month-old peated spirit that's really interesting as well. But for now, I'm scoring the Macallan Arctic Single Malt an 87. Last May, we met Kim Møller-Elshow of Denmark's Nyborg Distillery in episode 640, and he recently sent over a sample of his Isle of Fionia Ardor Single Malt. Batch number 116 is bottled at 59.8% ABV, and started out in Tennessee whiskey casks for between 4 and 7 years, before those casks were blended and put into an ex-sherry butt for a brief time. The nose is fruity, with notes of peaches, pears, baked apples, a hint of nutmeg, honey, and just a touch of oak. The taste is thick and nectar-like with fruity notes of fresh peaches and pears, good spicy notes of clove, black pepper, and nutmeg, and touches of honey and vanilla that bring it all together. The finish is long and slightly dry with lingering spices and just a hint of oak. It's a very nice whiskey, and I'm scoring this batch of Isle of Fionia Ardor Danish single malt an 89. I've added all of these tasting notes and many more to the searchable list of more than 2,100 different whiskeys at WhiskyCast.com. In fact, I added 17 new whiskeys to the list this week. Of course, WhiskyCast.com is also where you'll find our latest WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast, WhiskyCast HD videos, the latest whiskey news, events, and much more, including a complete archive of past episodes. The cask strength conversation continues all week long online. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr at WhiskyCast. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
This is whiskey, Johnny Walker's Scotch whisky, from this place and these people, aye, Scotch makers, creating the bold and complex flavour of Johnny Walker Black Label. Step right up.
WhiskyCast. Brought to you by Redbreast, the definitive single pot still Irish whiskey. Those in the know Redbreast.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2018, and comes to you each week from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.